We are out here in the Persian Gulf with the US military, and this might look like a normal boat, but it is actually a drone boat.
But if you do see it on the water, don't be offended if no one waves back to you, because, well, there's no one on board.
For the first time in US history, AI-controlled warships aren't circling test ranges or hugging the coastline. They're deep in the Pacific, operating as real warships with no sailors aboard.
The design of the Sea Hunter is that it's unmanned. And in being unmanned, it avoids many of the restrictions of a conventional vessel.
No bridge, no bunks, no command center. Just steel, sensors, and an autonomous brain steering through thousands of miles of open ocean on its own.
So Seagull is the only unmanned surface vehicle in the world that has actually launched a torpedo.
And what they ended up doing in those waters stunned even the Navy. Inside America's first AI warships. Sea Hunter and Seahawk are the U.S. Navy's first AI-controlled warships. They were built to stay at sea for weeks, follow orders from a small team on shore, and do some of the most boring and dangerous jobs without putting a single sailor in danger. The push for these ships started with a simple problem. Quiet diesel-electric submarines are hard to find. They are cheaper than nuclear subs, can hide in shallow coastal waters, and force big, expensive ships and aircraft to burn fuel and crew time just to keep track of them. The Pentagon's research arm, DARPA, responded with a project called ACTIVE, short for Anti-Submarine Warfare Continuous Trail Unmanned Vessel.
The Navy will be taking a large step into the future of maritime prowess by testing the newest anti-submarine warfare ship, the Sea Hunter.
The basic idea was to build a small ship that can go out alone, lock onto an enemy submarine, and shadow it for weeks at a fraction of the usual cost. Sea Hunter was the first full-size result of that project. DARPA chose Leidos as the main contractor, and the hull was built in the Pacific Northwest, first at Christensen Shipyards and later finished at Vigor Industrial in Portland, Oregon. The ship was launched and christened in the middle of the last decade and later handed off from DARPA to the Navy's research office for full-scale trials. On paper, it sits in a category the Navy calls a medium unmanned surface vessel, meaning it is big enough to cross an ocean on its own, but still much smaller and cheaper than a destroyer. In size, Sea Hunter looks more like a long fishing boat than a classic gray warship. It is about 132 feet long, with one narrow main hull and two thinner side hulls that stick out on each side like training wheels. That three-hull style, called a trimaran, spreads the ship's weight across the water. It makes the ship very stable without needing a deep, heavy keel, so it can work in shallower areas as well as deep water. Fully loaded, Sea Hunter weighs around 140 to 145 tons. Its two diesel engines drive twin propellers and can push it to speeds in the low 30s in miles per hour. When it slows down to a steady cruise of about 14 miles per hour, it can travel roughly 11,500 miles on a single fuel load and stay at sea for about 70 to 90 days without resupply. The hull and systems are built to keep working in rough conditions, with tests showing it can safely operate in waves of around 6 to 7 feet and survive storms with seas climbing close to 20 feet. Inside, the ship feels very different from a normal Navy vessel. There is no permanent crew on board, so there is no need for sleeping spaces, bathrooms, or a galley. There are spaces for engines and fuel tanks, racks of electronics and cables running through trunks and compartments, along with access ladders and hatches so maintenance teams can get in and work when the ship is in port. But there is no classic bridge with big windows at the front. During the test years, a small removable control station could be bolted in place so engineers could ride along, but in normal use, the ship is meant to run dark inside, with no one aboard. To keep it safe when nobody is there to fix anything, the design uses multiple pumps, generators, and steering systems, plus built-in health checks that constantly watch engine temperature, fuel flow, steering pressure, and power levels, and send status reports back over satellite links. The clever part is the brain that drives it. Sea Hunter uses a set of eyes and ears that will sound familiar: surface search radar, cameras, and an automatic identification system receiver, or AIS, which listens for radio signals that most commercial ships broadcast with their name, position, speed, and course. A high-accuracy navigation system ties all of this together. The software takes in that raw data and builds its own live picture of every ship and hazard around it. The key idea is something engineers call sparse supervisory control. That means a small group of people on shore or on another ship tell Sea Hunter what mission to do and where they want it to go, but they do not steer it like a remote-controlled toy. The ship makes its own small decisions about turning, slowing down, and passing other ships safely. Humans watch what it is doing on screens and can always step in if something looks wrong. But they do not have to sit and move the rudder every second. Under all of this sits the main mission that pushed the design in the first place: hunting submarines. Diesel-electric subs can shut down their engines and drift in shallow areas, making them very hard to hear from far away. Sea Hunter is meant to move in closer and stay there. The ship can tow long sonar arrays and carry other underwater listening gear. Once a wider network of planes, satellites, or other sensors hints that a submarine is in a certain patch of ocean, Sea Hunter can move into that area and start listening in detail. Its software can lock onto a submarine, keep updating its position, and send that information back to Navy ships or shore stations, while it quietly follows the target for a long time. One of the strongest arguments for this kind of ship is money. Building the first Sea Hunter cost about $20 million, which is tiny compared to a modern destroyer that runs into the billions. Senior Pentagon leaders have also put rough numbers on daily running costs. They have said it should take only around $15,000 to $20,000 per day to operate Sea Hunter, compared with about $700,000 per day to run a destroyer. Still, Sea Hunter was always meant to be a starting point. After several years of testing and lessons learned, the Navy and Leidos moved on to a second ship, Seahawk. Seahawk has almost the same basic size and overall look as Sea Hunter. It is another long trimaran with the same general mission in mind and a similar full load weight of around 145 tons. But Seahawk was built later on the Gulf Coast under a Navy research contract worth about $35.5 million. And it folds in more than 300 specific improvements based on what engineers saw on the first ship. Those tweaks include upgraded electrical systems, a more flexible mounting system for payloads, and a built-in test operator station to make trials easier. Fuel and range stayed central to the design. Public releases describe Seahawk carrying about 14,000 gallons of fuel, feeding twin diesel engines just like Sea Hunter. That gives it the same basic ability to head out for long stretches without refueling. What changed was how the ship supports new gear. The improved electrical network makes it easier to plug in different sonars, electronic packages, and future systems without tearing up the whole interior each time. The payload mounting points are stronger and more modular, so teams can bolt sensors on and off faster between trials. A dedicated test control area on board, used when people ride the ship during early checkouts, helps engineers watch what the autonomy software is doing in real time and adjust settings before letting the ship go out fully on its own. As these two ships matured, the Navy started to treat them less as one-off science projects and more as tools for shaping the future fleet. Somewhere else in the Navy, engineers have already taken those lessons and applied them to much larger unmanned ships that began life as ordinary commercial workboats and were quietly turned into something very different. America's biggest AI warships. Ranger and Mariner did not start life as warships. They began as simple workboats for the oil and gas industry, built to haul cargo and workers offshore. Later, the U.S. military stepped in, stripped out the extras, filled the hulls with computers and sensors, and turned them into something new: large AI-guided warships. The project behind them is called Ghost Fleet Overlord, run by a small group in the Pentagon known as the Strategic Capabilities Office. Their idea was to stop waiting for brand new ship designs and instead upgrade ships that already exist. Around 2018, they picked a type of commercial ship called a Fast Support Vessel, or FSV. They wanted to add sensors and self-driving systems and see if FSVs could act like warships without a full crew on board. Fast support vessels are built to be tough and quick, but cheap to run, which makes them good test beds. Ranger was the first big Overlord test ship. Mariner came later as a more advanced sister. Both are now owned by the U.S. Navy, but they were built by a team made up of Leidos, a major defense company, and Gulfcraft in Louisiana, a shipyard known for building workboats. Each ship is about 193 feet long and about 32 feet wide, roughly the size of a small patrol ship rather than a giant destroyer. The basic hull still looks like a fast support vessel with a long bow, a simple deckhouse, and a big open working deck toward the back. They're powered by 5 main diesel engines that together produce about 10,000 horsepower and drive water jets instead of normal propellers. Water jets suck in seawater and push it out at high speed, which gives good handling and lets the ship work in shallower water. 3 generators provide electric power for computers, cooling, and electronics. The ships keep large fuel tanks because they were always meant to stay at sea for long stretches without refueling. On top of that hull, the Navy added a lot of electronics. The deckhouse holds commercial radars and a cluster of antennas for satellite links and short-range radios. The open rear deck has been cleared and strengthened so it can carry up to 6 standard cargo containers. Some containers hold extra fuel or support gear, others hold racks of servers, control consoles, and in some tests, missile launch cells. This container idea is important because it means the ship can swap missions by swapping boxes instead of cutting open the hull each time. Inside, the human spaces have been cut down to the bare minimum. Ghost Fleet Overlord ships are often called uncrewed, but in practice, they can still carry a tiny caretaker crew, normally around 6 sailors to take manual control and fix problems during demanding trials. Day to day, most of the ship's functions are meant to be automatic. The engines, steering gear, pumps, and electrical panels are tied into a central monitoring system. Software checks temperatures, pressures, fuel levels, and power loads, and can make small changes on its own to keep the ship running smoothly. The heart of the change is the self-driving system. The ship's navigation gear knows its own position from GPS. Its radars and other sensors watch what is around it. The onboard computers take that data and plan safe paths that stay clear of other traffic and hazards. One of the most important things inside Mariner is not something you can see from the pier at all. It is a digital version of the same combat system that manages radar and weapons on many U.S. Navy cruisers and destroyers. That system is called Aegis. On those large warships, Aegis takes data from big radars and other sensors and shows a clear picture of the sky and sea around the ship so crews can decide which targets to track and which ones to shoot. Mariner does not carry that whole setup with giant rotating antennas and a large operations room. Instead, it runs what Navy leaders call a virtualized Aegis on hardened computer servers. In simple terms, the brain of the system has been turned into software that can run on an unmanned ship. This lets engineers test what happens when a ship with almost no crew hosts the same kind of thinking core that normally lives on a big manned warship. Ranger, on the other hand, became known for a different kind of test. The Pentagon released a short video showing a gray ship at sea with a plain metal box mounted on its rear deck. The lid of the box flips open. A standard Missile 6, a long-range weapon designed to shoot down aircraft and cruise missiles and hit some targets at sea, blasts straight up into the air from one of 4 cells inside the box. The ship underneath is Ranger, and the box is a containerized launcher known as the Mk-70. That test showed that an unmanned ship, steered by software and watched from afar, could safely carry and fire one of the Navy's most advanced missiles. Ranger and Mariner are still test platforms, but they sit at a very important middle point. They are larger and more heavily powered than earlier small unmanned ships, so they can carry serious weapons and a full combat system brain. At the same time, they are cheaper and simpler than frontline cruisers and destroyers, so the Navy can afford to take more risks with them and push their self-driving systems harder. But building these ships was only the beginning. The real test came when the Navy finally sent all 4 of them out into open water. How America's AI ships patrolled the Pacific. In early August 2023, the U.S. Navy quietly sent out Sea Hunter, Seahawk, Ranger, and Mariner from the coast of Southern California. At first glance, they looked like ordinary gray hulls moving past the breakwater. But there was one big difference. Nobody was standing on the bridge. The Navy gave the whole experiment a name: Integrated Battle Problem 23.2, often shortened to IBP 23.2. The Navy wanted to see if 4 drone warships could leave California, cross the Pacific like normal ships, work with other forces for months, pull into foreign ports, and then come home again in one piece. For this deployment, they were grouped under one organization, Unmanned Surface Vessel Division 1, based in California. That unit was responsible for planning their moves, giving them missions, and collecting all the data they sent back. The trip began on August 7th, 2023. That day, Sea Hunter, Seahawk, Ranger, and Mariner left Naval Base Ventura County, near Port Hueneme, and headed west into the open ocean. From then on, most of their movement was handled by their own software. The first stretch of the journey doubled as a chance to work with regular U.S. forces. As the 4 drone ships moved out across the Pacific, they linked up at times with a carrier strike group built around the aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson during a wider event called Large-Scale Exercise 23. They also spent time near other U.S. ships and aircraft that were already at sea, practicing simple things like sailing in formation, passing data back and forth, and taking fuel and supplies from a support ship without anyone standing at the wheel. All of this fed the main goal behind IBP 23.2. The Pacific Fleet wanted answers to basic questions. Could unmanned ships really handle long open ocean crossings without riding on heavy-lift transports? Would the self-driving software stay stable over months at sea, including stretches of bad weather? Could Sea Hunter, Seahawk, Ranger, and Mariner be treated as normal parts of a task group instead of as fragile science projects that need special care? The hope was that by the end of the deployment, commanders would have hard numbers on fuel use, breakdowns, repair needs, and how often human operators had to override the ship's own choices. After this first phase, the 4 ships pushed deeper into the Western Pacific, toward the area the Navy calls the 7th Fleet Region. This is the stretch of ocean that covers Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and large parts of the wider Pacific Island chain. Somewhere along this route, the unmanned ships crossed key waypoints like Hawaii and Guam, always feeding back status reports and sensor data to their division. By this point, they were no longer a science experiment sitting just off California. They were now part of the normal flow of U.S. forces shifting across the theater. One of the biggest public milestones came in Japan. In mid-September, 2 of the larger unmanned ships, Ranger and Mariner, pulled into Fleet Activities Yokosuka, a major U.S. naval base south of Tokyo and home to the forward-deployed 7th Fleet. It was the first time U.S. Navy unmanned surface ships had ever visited Japan. They were now tied up at a busy pier in one of the most watched ports in Asia. During the Yokosuka stop, Japanese sailors and officers had a chance to walk the decks, talk with the American teams who operate the ships from shore, and get a feel for how these new platforms might fit into future joint work. From Japan, the 4 ships kept moving south and east through key island areas. Public reports later noted stops in Guam, the Marshall Islands, and Papua New Guinea as the ships threaded their way toward Australia. Each of those places matters for a different reason. Guam is a major U.S. hub in the Central Pacific, packed with airfields, fuel sites, and repair yards. The Marshall Islands sit close to important sea lanes and host missile test ranges. Papua New Guinea is a rising partner where the United States and Australia are growing their own naval presence. Bringing unmanned ships through these ports was a way to test how easy it was to clear them with local authorities, get basic services, and fold them into the normal rhythms of each place. The high-profile moment of the trip came when all 4 ships reached Australia. On October 24, 2023, Sea Hunter, Seahawk, Ranger, and Mariner arrived in Sydney for a scheduled port visit. For a lot of people on the harbor, This was likely their first time seeing a full-size warship-class hull moving with no sailors on deck. In Sydney, the port visit lined up with an event called Autonomous Warrior 2023, run by the Australian Defence Force at Jervis Bay and nearby waters. This exercise brought together a mix of drones, robots, and crewed platforms from different allies. The 4 American unmanned ships joined in, working alongside Australian ships and other systems. Together, they practiced simple but important tasks like sharing radar and camera feeds, passing target information from one unit to another, and letting the unmanned ships act as scouts ahead of crewed forces. The focus was on showing that these platforms could plug into Allied routines, not just US ones. Back at sea, Sea Hunter, Seahawk, Ranger, and Mariner kept a steady pattern. Sometimes they sailed by themselves, acting as forward lookouts that could watch stretches of ocean without putting sailors at risk. Other times they moved with crewed ships in mixed groups. During part of the deployment, an American surface warship named USS Oakland served as the control ship. That ship acted as a kind of mother and manager, sitting in the middle of the group while operators on board watched the data feeds from the unmanned ships and changed their orders as needed. In other phases, the drone ships took part in formation work with ships like the USS Gabrielle Giffords and Allied vessels, including at least one Japanese frigate. U.S. Pacific Fleet's own write-ups say that across the whole event, the 4 ships traveled a combined 46,651 nautical miles, which is roughly 53,700 regular miles. Commanders later said the ships handled all kinds of sea states and weather, and the self-driving system stayed steady enough to make them comfortable planning more, longer trips in the future. The data on fuel use, breakdowns, and small software issues is now being used to improve the next version of the control systems and to write better rules for how fleets should handle maintenance and crew support for unmanned ships. After months of moving between exercises and ports, the deployment ended in January 2024. On January 15th, all 4 ships returned to Naval Base Ventura County, the same California home they had left 5 months earlier. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.